Good evening, Tigard. I'm your mayor, Jason Snider, and I'm here with...
Hi, Tigard. I'm Heidi Lueb. I'm one of your city councilors.
We are trying to make sure that we're staying 6 feet apart, so we're barely in the camera here, but we're doing our best to maintain our social distancing. We are here for a Facebook Live event wanting to talk about our police levy is primarily why we had set up a number of listening sessions. Originally, these events were going to be live both at coffee shops and various other establishments throughout the city, and we had that all scheduled out and planned, and counselors all signed up. And then came COVID-19, and all those plans have changed, which is why you've seen us doing so many of these events in this type of a format. We had intended to have these events anyway, and we are now having to manage that via remote Facebook Live. So that's why we are here for you. We want to be able to answer any questions that you may have about our upcoming police levy, which, as a reminder, was put on the ballot before we knew about COVID-19, because that's one question that we get quite a bit is, why is it on the ballot? This is a terrible time to be asking for increased funding, and we can certainly talk about that more. But we put it on the ballot months ago, so and we were not able to remove it from the ballot. So we want to talk about, I think, to start with tonight, we're certainly interested in your questions, but we also want to talk about the finances related to the levy, because we get a lot of questions about the finances, and particularly just about where your tax dollars go, what they fund, how much of your tax dollars actually go to the city, which is actually surprisingly little when you break it down. We've got some graphics that we may post into the Facebook Live feed for you to take a look at and ask questions about. But we also want to make sure that we're answering your questions. So please do submit your questions in the comment fields, and we will happily do our best to answer them. Councilor Lueb, you want to talk about the kind of the numbers crunch with the levy and the finances?
Sure. So one of the things to know is that Tigard actually has one of the lowest tax rates in Washington County, which puts us kind of in a tough position. Expenses have been going up at about a 4% rate for a while, and we are only allowed to increase the amount of taxes at 3%, which it doesn't sound like a big deal, right? 1%, it sounds pretty small, but when you think about it over time, it's actually a pretty big deal. To use sort of an elementary example, if you start out with $100 in each pot, what you're doing is the city's rate goes up and it goes to 103 one year, but the expenses are actually 104. So the city continues to go up at a 3% rate at that 103. And then the other expenses still go up at 4%. And so while it starts off really small at 1%, over time it really just does this, and it compounds, and it just makes the issue so much bigger over time.
And we're 25 years into that from Measure 5 and Measure 50.
Yeah, and it's super complicated. One of the things we hear all the time is there's so many new houses and stuff coming in. Shouldn't that really pay for itself and cover this gap? And one of the things to keep in mind, and I think we're going to post this super helpful thing, is for your taxes, we take a dollar and we talk about where everything goes. And the biggest amount of your taxes, 45 cents out of your dollar, goes to the Tigard-Tualatin School District. And 17 cents goes to Washington County, and 17 cents of every dollar for your taxes goes to the city of Tigard. So it's sort of hard sometimes if you aren't looking at the breakdown and you're thinking, oh, I'm paying X amount of dollars to the city. It's really just 17% of your bill is going to the city of Tigard. And as I was talking about earlier, there's that gap over time that gets really big. The new people coming in, those new houses, are actually coming, and they're helping to sort of make the gap a little bit smaller, but it's certainly not covering the gap and allowing us to continue to hire to fill that extra need. So it's a really complicated issue that I tried to just explain pretty simply, but there's a lot of different stuff going on as far as why we haven't been able to keep up with it.
So Councilor Lueb, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I kind of am. I knocked on your door when I was running for mayor, and I also learned through that process that you, before you were city councilor with the last levy, you didn't support the last levy in your own voting.
I didn't.
So would you mind talking through that and maybe what you've learned since going from a member of the public to, and I hope you're okay with me putting you on the spot there. I guess I've done it now, but I think it's really important for people to, realize that being involved and being knowledgeable about what's going on is frankly a bit complicated, and you can talk about that, but maybe talk through how and why your decisions changed and what you've learned since you voted no.
Yeah, growing up, I am a public school kid. I'm a product of public schools down in Crater. I went to Crater High School in Central Point, Oregon. I grew up in a small town, single mom with just my brother and I, and it was a situation in which I got to where I am because of the great teachers that I had and the support system and all of those sorts of things. And so I'm a huge advocate for all of these things and supporting the cities and that sort of stuff. And this was actually the first time in my life I ever voted no for something.
I remember you telling me that.
That
got my attention
or
too.
Supporting, it was the first time I voted no, and my husband and I actually sat and had a pretty robust conversation when we pulled out the voters pamphlet to kind of talk through the last levy that was on the ballot. And I just sort of felt like it was muddy. It wasn't clear why the money was needed. It wasn't clear as far as exactly what it was going for. And so it was something I had a really hard time, and it wasn't clear exactly how much it was going to be because I thought it was a certain amount on the whole amount and not just a small amount. And so it was something I voted no on. And I did have a conversation with the mayor and let him know that I voted no. And I've told other people, but it's something where I just didn't feel like the city did a good enough job in explaining it and telling us why and what was needed and where exactly it was going.
And it was kind of big too, right?
And it was big. It was asking for, a good amount of money. And so it was just something where I felt like it wasn't validated and the ask wasn't something that was clear.
So what's different now?
Well, I think it's incredibly clear and very narrow. I think the city has done a great job with some due diligence as far as having that additional what am I thinking of? I'm just blanking on the word. When we had the auditors come in to say, are we doing a good job? We think we're doing a good job, but what's going on here? And to really be focused and to say, a lot of these things are great to haves, and I think maybe there were some great to haves in the last one where the services would have continued on, but what is something that's really deeply needed in our community to help keep our community safe? And it's something where I think we had a lot of robust discussion and a lot of back and forth as far as what should be included in the levy, what shouldn't. And it was something where I felt strongly that we very clearly articulated why we needed it. It's very clear where the money is going. And so it's something that I became in support of.
Well, we've got some questions rolling in here and some comments. So Linda says, with the economy tanking, how are people supposed to pay more to the city? I think this is an excellent question, and we talked a bit ago, right as we were beginning, about the fact that the council had actually made the decision to put this levy on the ballot before COVID-19 started to impact our lives, and by the time that happened, we were past the time or an opportunity to take this off the ballot. I'm not sure we would have, partly for reasons that we can explain about the level of concern that the city council has about our ability to effectively respond to police calls and protect and keep our community safe. And so for those reasons, we may have moved forward anyway, but that wasn't really even an option to discuss. So that is, I guess, the short answer to why. I think it's a challenge for all of us during this very uncertain time when we're trying to figure out how we are going to pay for our most basic needs, and I think it's a very valid question. We also still have an obligation to protect and keep the community safe, and what I can say we've done is made sure that this levy is absolutely as small as it can be from a financial perspective and still achieve the results that we want to. So we're trying to be as efficient with the public money as we can. In comparison to the levy that was on the ballot a couple years ago. This levy is probably, well, the last one was $1.18. This is 29 cents per thousand. So that's 4 or 5 times smaller than the prior levy. And we've really done a lot to narrow that down to just the critical police services that we feel that we absolutely have to have, and that the police chief feels like she has to have to be able to keep our community safe. We also had a comment and question. Comment from Valerie. I don't think that messaging has improved. That's good feedback for us to have. We have really worked hard, to try to improve the communication. But I'm hearing that may not be working from her perspective. She's asking what is being done to control costs. And that's a really interesting question. Let's talk about that related to police right now, because I think this is one of the most interesting parts of this, is that when you talk about controlling the costs in the police department, which is where we spend the vast majority of the general fund money that we can choose where it's spent, almost all of the expenses are in labor. And we have to negotiate labor contracts and provide health care, and we have to provide retirement benefits to our police officers, who are very hardworking and deserve all those things. But more importantly, just from a basic economics perspective, is we have to be competitive in the market. I personally don't want to live in a community where we are trying to make sure that our police officers are the lowest paid police officers in the Portland metro area. That is not the community that I want to be in. That's a very problematic place to be. You don't retain the best officers. You don't attract the best officers. The people that stay are probably in that environment, if we were to be if we were not paying competitive wages for police services, we would have the best people leave, and we'd have the people that stayed would be people maybe we wouldn't want to stay. We need to be competitive in the market for police wages and benefits. We don't have any other staff in the city that is even in PERS. A lot of people don't know that, but in Tigard, we only have sworn law enforcement staff on PERS. It's a huge savings to the city. But if we were to, for example, say, we're going to take sworn law enforcement staff off of PERS in Tigard, or try to do that, if we even could, from a bargaining perspective. But if we did that, we would be in an even less competitive market for attracting and retaining quality police officers, which is critical to keep our community safe. So that's I think an important point. Someone just asked if there's a PERS hole that we're trying to fill, or is it solely retention oriented? We do not have, partly because the city doesn't have any other staff that are on PERS, and it is simply the sworn police personnel. We do not have a PERS hole per se that we're trying to fill. But when we are funding our police staff, we do have to make sure that they're at market, and that gets evaluated through the labor bargaining process every couple of years. We're actually in that process right now. Let's see. Someone said this is for additional officers per shift, which we need. Marissa, you are absolutely right. This is about adding 8 police officers to patrol and 1 school resource officer. You are absolutely right, and I think both Councilor Lueb and I would agree with you that we do need them. We need them to make sure that we can respond to more than one high priority call at a time in the city. Again, a city of 54,000 people. That's a big challenge. We need an additional school resource officer to make sure that there's appropriate, proactive work that's being done in the schools. And then the last part of the levy is to make sure that all of our sworn staff in the police department get advanced crisis intervention and mental health training at a much more robust level than they get in the police academy. this has been shown to be highly effective, and it's a very significant amount of training. Yet, because of our current staffing and budget constraints, we've only been able to get like 4 or 5 officers through that training in the last 5 years.
I'd like to speak to the fact that in 2010, and compared to 2010, in 2018, our police actually responded to 4,800 more calls than in 2010. And the types of calls that they're responding to are changing. There's a lot more where people may be in crisis or some sort of societal call, which can actually take hours for our officers to manage and to deal with, especially if there's going to be transport to any sort of area. So it's a combination of things. Our population is growing, the amount of calls are growing, and the types of calls are changing, which is why we felt that it was so important to have this de-escalation training, so our officers continue to have more tools in their toolkit in order to better respond to these calls and to manage these situations. So it's something that we just felt was really important to add on top of it. But it is important to know that the types of calls are changing. It's not the same world that it was 10 years ago, and it's a situation in which we need to be able to respond to it, and we need to be able to support our officers, putting them out there to take those kinds of calls.
So another question from Valerie is growth in headcount proportional to city growth? This is a really interesting question because our headcount in the police department has actually declined and stayed static for more than a decade while the city's grown quite a bit. So the answer is no, it's not been proportional, but probably in the opposite way that you thought. So I think that's really also important to highlight how because of the finance picture that Councilor Lueb highlighted earlier, we have slowly eroded the level of service in the form of number of police officers per people in the city, kind of any metric that you want, even just raw numbers over the last decade.
And something I think is important to discuss is our police officers have 5 patrol districts in the city of Tigard, and right now our minimums for staffing, which I think are being done a little over half the time, is what we're running at. Our day shift is 3 officers and a supervisor. Swing shift is 4 officers and a supervisor. And the graveyard shifts dependent upon whether or not it's a weekend. So Sunday through Thursday, it's 3 officers, and Friday and Saturday, it's 4 officers and a supervisor. So if you think about it, there's 5 districts, but our minimums don't ever actually hit 5. And so it's something where our imminent and immediate calls are actually over 6 minutes right now. And those are the calls that are the most important to get to as quickly as possible because somebody is in danger. And it's really important for us to be able to raise those minimum staffing levels, to be able to do things like the mayor was speaking to be able to handle more than one call at a time, a crisis call, and to be able to get to our community members as quickly as possible when they're in those dangerous situations. And so adding these officers is going to be able to allow us to raise those minimum staffing levels to be able to answer a lot of some of these issues, and we're really hoping to get that minimum or that call time for our imminent and immediate calls to 5 minutes or under.
So Court has asked us a really excellent question. Then why doesn't the increased tax base from that population increase cover increased law enforcement costs? This is just an excellent question, Court, and one that is a little complicated to explain. So I'm going to ask you to stick with us while we try to go through it. But the key things to know, first of all, are that when a residential property is brought into the city now, or a house is built in the city, it immediately is not paying, because of the way the property tax measures are, it's brought onto the tax rolls already not paying for what it costs to deliver services to that house. So that's one of the challenges that's been created with the restrictions with Measure 5 and Measure 50, because not only do they restrict growth to 3%, but they also set the amount that the assessed property tax value, not market value, but the assessed value can be set at. And it has to be set at, I think it's the countywide, there's like a countywide average formula that's used to set those. And when they're set, they're already lower than what it costs us to provide the service. So there is additional revenue from that. And what that's allowed us to do, frankly, over the last 15 to 20 years since Measure 5 and 50 really started to have an impact on our finances, is they have made it so that we've not had to cut as much over time. But that's not to say that it's not continuing the gap, because that they're already not covering the costs of delivering the services that they demand. So hopefully that helps. Marissa says, if Tigard was fully staffed last night during the big call, how would that situation have been handled differently? Do you know exactly which big call we're talking about?
I was trying to think about it. I know there was the chase a couple days ago, where the car hit the transformer or the pole and our electricity flickered. But,
yep, on 99.
Yeah, but I don't know, or I haven't heard about a call from last night.
Yeah, I don't. Marissa, if you can give us a little more info about that call, we'll do our best to answer or get you an answer from the police staff. Valerie has just said, given that dollars are fungible, yep, I tell my kids that all the time when they're wasting money. Will this increase overall funding to public safety on a straight dollars collected basis? Or will there be any recollection of money for other functions? No, we have priced, this is a simple answer. We have priced this exactly, the 29 cents per thousand. We can actually tell you how many cents go to each thing. It is priced exactly what those things cost. There is some priced into the plan. There's a temporary HR staff, for example, to do, I think it's half-time recruiting, because onboarding 8 or 9 additional police officers is going to take quite a bit of resource and human resources, but that's temporary. There is some additional support for property and evidence, but again, that's a direct police service, and 8 or 9 officers are going to create more property and evidence and records, so those things are critical to cover. Let's see. Marissa is saying something about the call was at Summer Lake. So I don't... let's see. At around 9:35 p.m. on Wednesday, April 15th, Tigard Police responded to a report of an unwanted person at the Parkwood Court Apartments. When officers arrived, subject took off in a stolen car and led officers on an erratic chase, at one point hitting a light pole and continuing to drive through several neighborhood yards. Okay, so that, and then the subject evaded on foot. So this is a major type of incident, and at 9:35 on a Wednesday night, we are
4 officers.
Yeah, we are at 4 officers, 4 patrol officers in the city.
Still swing, right?
Yeah, that's right at the tail end of swing shift. 10 o'clock is when graveyard starts for our officers. So that's a situation where you're now trying to handle that situation in the city of Tigard and every other police call that's happening in the city of Tigard. Very challenging to do so with our current staffing. Valerie is asking about what we're doing with the League of Oregon Cities about Measures 5 and 50.
So I can actually speak to that.
Yeah, go for it.
I have joined their committee to talk about finances. I think there's maybe 15 of us from across the state, and we had our first meeting last week or 2 weeks ago. And part of it was a discussion on, given everything that's happening, what are things that we're going to focus on. And it's certainly something I think that we're interested in looking at doing. And I think it's complicated. It's really complicated, and it's something that we're going to have to spend a lot of time figuring out. But also in the light of everything with COVID right now, and trying to figure out our economy and our businesses and those sorts of things. I think our priority for the next year, and again, it's for further discussion, and it's something that we all expressed interest in, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, yes, it's something we really, really want to be able to handle and sort of unwind, but we're also looking at making sure that our state and our businesses and our people are doing okay during and after this crisis, because it's certainly something that may be affecting tax dollars and cities and counties. So it's something that I think has sort of taken a precedence, but it's definitely on our radar, and everyone at the meeting it's something that we want to discuss, and it's something that we want to tackle.
We actually have a state legislative agenda every year that the council puts together. We also put together a federal agenda, and this is these are the priorities that we use when we're going and lobbying on behalf of the city. You may not know that, but your mayor and city councilors are regularly working with both our federal leaders and our state leaders, going down to the Capitol in Salem, for example, and lobbying. That's something that we actually do with some regularity. I've been down there more than once in the last year doing that activity. And what I would say about that is that Measure 5 and Measure 50 have been on, or just the property tax reform as a major topic, have been on our legislative agenda for the state every single year I've been on the city council. We push. We hope someday that there's some resolution to it, even if it's as simple as just resetting a property's value when it sells. That would seem like kind of a logical thing to do. And we will continue to push the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium. I actually brought this up during the Metropolitan Mayors Consortium meeting as we were talking about what we wanted to focus on for our lobbying efforts. This is a group of 26 Portland Metro mayors, and I suggested that we singularly focus on Measure 5 and 50 and property tax reform in general until we get movement. That so far we haven't finalized anything, but just so you know, that's how we're trying to advocate for this.
And it's something that, I'm very much going to continue to push for. I think we're lucky to have the seat to be able to advocate and lobby the League of Oregon Cities, to lobby our lawmakers and consider this a priority. So it's definitely something we want to manage and dig into. And it's something I actually walked into the committee being my biggest priority, is to make sure that we can figure this out.
Linda says, thank you for helping the Tigard community. Valerie has a comment. Stop saying things are complicated, please. We can unravel complexity. Thank you for the explanations. Valerie, excellent point. The challenge that I think we have, and I'll just share this, is that over the last probably decade, people's attention spans have decreased even further. And so trying to explain the kinds of things that we've just explained in the last 29 minutes, and I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to do this, is not something most people are willing to do. And so we've really been challenged with how to explain some of these things in 20 or 30 second sound bites, and that's actually very difficult to do. Let's see. Marissa says, as a business owner, I appreciate what you guys do and hope this passes so we can continue to have great service. Alexandria, thank you guys for everything you do. You're appreciated. Gina says, thank you. Those are all particularly meaningful to me because I don't know any of those individuals personally. So I appreciate getting positive feedback from people that just think we're doing the right things for the community.
Well, and I appreciate you watching. There's a lot of different things you could be doing right now, eating dinner or hanging out or watching TV or reading or being outside on this beautiful evening. It's kind of a picture perfect day in Tigard. And so I appreciate you being here to ask questions and to get involved and figure out, what the city is doing on your behalf. And so thank you for taking time out of your important day to be here with us.
We have, looking at our staff and whether we've missed any questions. Let's see. Connie supports the levy and is looking for talking points about the levy. Can we post some talking points about the levy in? Okay. So Connie, thank you for asking that, and we will absolutely get you talking points. Okay, Christy, forgive my ignorance. This is my first Tigard meeting, so this may have been addressed in earlier meetings. Let's get this all the way open. President Trump has given our governors autonomy in handling COVID-19 for their state. Has Governor Brown given counties and or mayors autonomy in handling COVID-19? In today's presidential briefing, it was announced that individual states may start qualifying for entering into phase 1 of reopening businesses, parks, etc. Just curious what your communication with Governor Brown is like during COVID-19, and if Tigard can decide the situation is safe for, say, parks to be open. So that's a great question, and one that's the way I would describe it is that the governor has the authority to make public health decisions. So does our county public health department and the public health officials. They have far broader authority than you might think. They don't usually have to exercise it because we're not usually in this type of an emergency. But just like in normal times, the city of Tigard can impose things that are more stringent than the state orders, but not less stringent. And the same goes for the county. So while we may make decisions about our own, absolutely cannot, you cannot play on a play structure. The order didn't say that. Us trying to help our community stay safe and implement the governor's order meant that we, as an example, closed down play structures and took down basketball hoops and nets to help keep people safe and help them comply with the governor's order.
I would also say, Christy, that 2 days ago the governor came out and introduced some framework for the reopening of Oregon. And she talks about that Oregon must first slow the growth of COVID-19 as well as acquire adequate personal protective equipment to protect the healthcare workers and first responders. Once those prerequisites are met, Oregon can begin to reopen by 3 different things. The first is ramping up COVID-19 testing capacity in every region of Oregon. The second is developing robust contact tracing systems to be able to track and contain COVID-19 cases. And the third is to establish a quarantine and isolation program for new cases. So it's something where I know the governor is looking forward, and I also know that the governor is working with Washington and California for us to sort of work as a region in order to be able to slowly start to reopen things. So while it doesn't give us any sort of definite timeline or an idea, it gives us some general framework as far as what she's expecting to look for in order for things to start to look different than what they do now.
Valerie says, on a related topic, how are Tigard police responding to the COVID-19 or COVID crisis, and are there other things we can do to support them? That's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. The work of our police department is still fundamentally something that we have to do during this crisis. So one of our focuses is on trying to keep them safe while they're responding to calls. The COVID-19 situation has also created a different type of, or added and changed some of the types of calls that we receive. Unfortunately, during this time, we're getting a lot more domestic violence calls than we typically do, and that's really concerning, and it also takes more resources to safely diffuse those situations. Those are I can tell you from my time as a reserve police officer in the city, are very tense calls. They are by far, those in traffic stops are by far the most dangerous and frequent calls that police officers go on. And so that's very challenging. So our job is to keep them safe with personal protective equipment while they're doing their jobs. We have right now an adequate supply. Our emergency operations center is continuing to monitor the amount of supply of personal protective equipment that we have. I actually saw in the report out today how many days of PPE we have left of various different types. And so right now we are in an okay place from a PPE perspective, and we actually got a donation, I think today, from Medical Teams International of almost 500 face masks. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Medical Teams International. Valerie, that is the kind of thing that the community can do to support our officers. Certainly trying to make sure that you're being safe and not speeding all help too.
Yeah, I hear lots of speeding.
You hear a lot of speeding?
I think being home more often, and the way that our house is situated, we've certainly heard some cars, and my husband and I have looked at each other and we're like, that doesn't sound like 35. So please stay within the speed limits.
So Valerie made a comment, it would be crazy for us to reopen anything before the rest of the metro area. That would be very unsafe. I would agree with you, and the mayors and the governor, frankly, have been working pretty closely together in coordinating that type of activity. So I don't think you're going to see city by city actions that are contradictory there. We try to work well. Carrie asks, is there any plan to help residents obtain masks? That's a great question. I've actually been a little troubled by this myself. I have a homemade mask and I've got some filters, but despite working in healthcare and being the mayor of the city, I don't have a single regular face mask, like a surgical mask or anything. I wouldn't have felt good about taking those from work. So that's a good question, Carrie, and something that I will have our staff and emergency operations center get back to you on. If you wouldn't mind sending an email into the council mail email box from our city website, we will get you an answer to that. Marissa is trying to get gowns for her staff. Gowns, at least wearing my other hat, I know gowns is the most challenging thing at this point in the healthcare system right now too, and I think the federal government has actually taken some steps to take orders that may have been placed by other entities to redistribute the gowns as needed. So that, Marissa, that may be partly why you're experiencing that. If you're needing those for your staff, I don't. Medical Teams International wasn't offering gowns. I'm not sure they would have offered them to police officers because gowns are not really police officer PPE per se. Let's see, Rick. What are a couple of takeaways the city of Tigard has got or learned from this experience, and how the city of Tigard is prepared for another citywide crisis if we were ever faced with one? You want to start on that? You want me to? Councilor Lueb, what do you think?
I think that last year that the city underwent a practice emergency situation, and I think there were some really great things that learned in order, and it enabled us to enact really quickly. I also know that because the city of Tigard had sort of stayed up on some of the technological aspects, our staff were able to much more quickly adapt to be able to working from home. So there was much less interruptions as far as city services and being able to help our community members who need everything. While it's certainly not business as usual, our employees are working hard in their personal situations in order to serve the community. So I think those are a couple of things that we've learned have worked really well and will continue to support in the future.
And every type of emergency or time that we activate our emergency operations center is a little bit different, but we do drill various scenarios. And ironically, last year's drill was a pandemic type of situation, so that was a little fortuitous. I guarantee you that in that scenario there was not a belief that we were going to be shutting down large parts of our economy and having millions of people out of work almost overnight. So you certainly while you drill, you can't always predict all the details, but Rick, be assured that we are learning as much as we can, and we actually do an after incident analysis as part of the incident command process in the city and part of the federal government structure. So once the incident's over, there will be a full debrief. Marissa is suggesting that about masks, that people join your next door neighborhood. There are many people making them. McCann's is giving them away when they have them, so that's good to know. I didn't know that. Alexandria, not an important question. Every question's important, but okay. Not an important question, but do I think it's regarding the Tigard Balloon Festival,
okay. Which unfortunately has been canceled for the year. And I think it's something where I know I really enjoy going, so I mean, it's upsetting, but
It is, and those are community events that the city, we don't get to decide whether the balloon festival is canceled or July 4th fireworks for that matter. Those are all community events that are put on. The city certainly helps support them, but we're not the ones putting them on, running them, financing them, or deciding whether they continue. So that's I know that's a surprise to some people because I think some people, when the balloon festival was canceled, they just immediately were like, why'd the city of Tigard do that? And that's not a decision that we make. The group that organizes that makes that decision.
yeah, and I think it's something where, it was a hard decision, but when there's so many different factors going on and there's so much preparation that has to go into it, that looking out that far ahead, I think they made the right call, even though I think it's a huge bummer for the region.
Well, and I think the challenge for them is that's already an event that barely works financially. And so when you have this much uncertainty and you're already looking at an event that barely can support itself financially and frankly, the people that put it on in some years have to pump money into it. When they're looking at this level of uncertainty, I think it's hard to bite that off financially. Laura's asking about any updates on the sinkhole on Greenfield. I have not heard specific dates on that. And I think it's partly been dependent on weather and a couple of other factors. But if you send, Laura, why don't you send your email address into the city council mailbox, and we will make sure that staff gets you an answer to that question specifically. Christy says she appreciates our service and taking the time to speak to the residents in Tigard. Kate is sad about the balloon festival being canceled, but understands. Thank you, Kate, for your understanding. I think we all share in your sadness about that. Well, we have just covered a lot of questions, and we are going to, if the questions slow down here or go away, we are going to end a little early instead of just trying to make up content during your evening, because that's not a good use of your time. So we'll give it another 30 seconds or so. If we get additional questions, we'll keep at it. Otherwise, we will thank you for tuning in and appreciate your time this evening, and wish you, given the weather I'm seeing, wish you a good walk tonight in your local community if that's something that you can participate in.
If you do get the opportunity to walk, the trees are just beautiful right now.
They are.
We walked the dogs earlier this morning, and with the clear blue sky, it was kind of stunning just to be out in Tigard, even though I think my allergies flared up simply from being out there.
Valerie says, thanks so much for your time. Next time, sit 6 feet apart. We actually are sitting further apart than you'd think. The camera here with the iPad is a little misleading, but we checked that last time around. I do want to highlight the next events. Monday, April 20th is the next council listening session like this one. That is Monday, April 20th from 2:30 to 3:30. That's intended to be a business roundtable, but will be open to everybody. Saturday, April 25th at 11 a.m., again with Council President Goodhouse. We have Monday, April 27th from 5 to 6 p.m. with Councilor Newton. And then there are additional dates and times into May that you can find on the City Council website.
Our ballots are going to be mailed on April 29th, so look for them to be hitting your mailbox in the next couple of weeks.
Good night, Tigard. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for coming.